more interested in the perspective of what it was like in Maine historically in the world of shoemaking and what it's like today. I was wondering if you can recall how big of a deal Maine was, or if you know what it was like on a global scale, if Maine had that much of an impact, and what it's like today.
Well, the East Coast in general had a terrific impact. And you really, I mean, the guy who could really tell you because he has lived it would be Mike Rancourt. You have to remember here we used to ship a truckload of leather to Boston every Friday. And the center of the universe for shoe-wise, when my grandfather started, was, as I said in my little note at the end, was Brockton, Mass. And he used to talk about, going around the Brockton Square and at the holidays, and he couldn't get in just to wish everybody a Merry Christmas in one day. I think Footjar was the last ones left there when they moved out of there.
Give me a sense of scale of what it was like on the East Coast, maybe over the last
I don't
century.
I don't know. I mean, in terms of the volumes, but again, starting with us, I mean, you have some names who've been absorbed or moved on. I mean, starting down there was, I mean, Alden was down there at one point, and Walkover was there, and I mean, there's names that I'd have to look up that I couldn't even bring back to. Jim Herman was there. I mean, our agent used to go up every week and call on people through Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Maine. I mean, Timberland was in New Hampshire, and then up into Maine, the biggest guys up there were Bass and Dexter. I mean, when I started Dexter, we visited the first company visits I ever went on, and Dexter was making 35,000 pairs of shoes a day. I mean, it was a machine. I mean,
Can you give me a
doing
date roughly on that?
late 70s,
Mm-hmm.
and at that time, our biggest customer for a while was Bass, and we were selling them glazed latigo for sandals. It was not quite half a foot a pair, and I think they were making 15,000 pairs a day of sandals. I mean, up in Wilton, Maine. So it was a big deal, and there were a bunch of large and small. There were guys that we didn't sell. I mean, I can go through and get you some of the names at one point, but there were some of the smaller sort of boutique and the predecessor to Mike's company with his dad they were the original Quaddy Mock, which was before the present day Quaddy. There were a handful that were, various sizes, and they just sort of all slowly, they either sold the brands. Sebago was there, for example. The name is around, but the factory out there is long gone. But in that cluster of the three states, so Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Maine, there was, and I don't know the exact distribution of dollars and footages that were used, but there was huge. And listen, New York City was tremendous in the leather goods. I mean, it was a gigantic market if you did belts and wallets. That died as I started, and that was one of the first things that got exported, first to the Caribbean basin, some to Mexico, and then quite quickly to Asia.
Oh, so it wasn't necessarily a matter of consumer taste changing. It was more of manufacturing moving around the world.
Manufacturing expense, yeah. I mean, they discovered that they could make saleable product in places with much less expensive real estate and labor.
So today, what's your sense of shoemaking on the East Coast, the scale comparatively to the late 70s?
No, it's an afterthought.
Yeah.
it's a fragment. I mean, Alden's much smaller than he was, and he's bigger than pretty much whatever's left out there. There's virtually, you have some smaller I mean, as in many industries here, as we said, when the leather industry exported itself, the worst thing you could be was medium size. And, we've talked about this because the big guys did it cheaper and the little guys did it better. So you have specialists. And I'll put the guys here, the small craft guys and all these trades up against anybody doing it anywhere, because the good guys are really good. The biggest guys, where the margins are first, they've gone to where they can find cheaper product. And in some cases, that's factories making, that's the findings and all the laces and everything else like that, soles in some cases, and the leather in the cases where you have customers who are looking for a specific product, and the quality has to be not terrible, but they're not. That's not the first yardstick. Your business and mine do really well with people who love the concept and the story, and they are prepared to buy something that's actually better, and they understand that costs more.
100%.
I mean, if price is your first question, we are probably not your answer.
I wonder how many people on the East Coast now are actually in the shoemaking sphere. I mean, I've got to think it's under
less and less.
I've got to think it's like, under 1,000.
There's small tanneries too. Yeah.
Yeah, but I was just thinking about shoes. But even if you include like the home hand sewing industry, which happens, people are doing some of the moccasin work at home. I mean, I don't even know.
Yep.
Well, that's how this whole thing came up. I was speaking with George from Oak Street, and he told me it's quite a challenge right now to find domestic hand sewing for mock toes. And he said to me, if I could get more people to make some hand sews, I could sell a lot of boat shoes. So that's kind of a bummer. And I was thinking about this history of Maine and all the hand sews that were done there and sort of dwindled.
And that's really interesting because that's like one of your indicators. That informally, in my mind, that's one of the things that tends to become popular when things get kind of ugly. And
you mean boat shoes come back when things get ugly? What do you mean?
Yeah.
Interesting. What do you think that is?
I have no idea.
The boat shoe indication.
No, I mean, it's and it doesn't really come back to where it was 50 years ago. But then people get into it, and then you get yourself into sort of an over capacity situation, and then there's another little ratchet downward.
You know what? I remember now what you're talking about. About a decade ago, Skip, we come out with Cavalier Chrome Excel roughly around that time.
Yep.
And we were doing the boat shoes for Sebago. So maybe that's what you're talking about. This could be the boat shoe cycle.
Yep.
And that was when stuff started to take off, actually.
Yeah, coming out of like 2009.
Yeah.
A little more than 10 years.
Right.
Yeah. The boat shoe index, the BSI. A commonly used indicator.
Yeah. I mean, it's
I'm fascinated.
And some of it sticks. I mean, it doesn't necessarily completely go away, but it's like any other. What you see, the other indicator is when it becomes the minute it becomes, and this is just my opinion, and you know me long enough, Phil, to know that I say this. So this opinion is free and worth what you're paying for it. So, but the minute it becomes a fashion, you're on the clock.
Mm-hmm.
Because people are then looking for the next fashion. But, the downside, upside, depending upon which side of it you're on, of the age of more perfect information is there are very few subtle changes. I mean, it would be like those guys on the East Coast who live on the ocean. It would be like if the tide went in and out in like 90 seconds. Because one minute you're selling a bunch of stuff and the next minute people change their minds and they're not looking for that anymore.
Well, are you seeing any trends, or both of you guys seeing any trends right now that are maybe the tide rolling in and out?
No, not particularly. And because of the leathers that we do being versatile enough to be used across different products, we tend to weather that pretty well. But you see it with shoe styles. I mean, if now today that George can sell a bunch of boat shoes when for a while he was struggling to do so, something else, people are not necessarily out there looking for, 9 more pairs of shoes. They've discovered a hole in their wardrobe for a look they'd like to have, and they'll get that.
And that's the cycle, right? That's the 10-year-ish cycle, and kind of makes sense.
And then once they have it, they kind of have it. I mean, not everybody then goes out and buys one of each color. Not that nobody does that, but that's not the market.